Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Before I begin this interview, I would like to remind you to join our alternative channels on Rumble and Telegram. YouTube, which is owned by Google, can shadow ban and censor us at any time, especially given our critical coverage on issues such as Ukraine and Israel. We provide a perspective that you just won't hear in the mainstream media. If that day ever comes where we shadow ban or censored, we won't be able to reach you even with an announcement. So make sure to visit the description of this video and click on the links to our Rumble and Telegram channels and join them today. Today I'll be talking to independent journalist and lawyer Dimitri Lascaris. As a lawyer, Dimitri focuses on class actions, human rights and international law. As a journalist, he has a YouTube channel called Reason to Resist. Dimitri, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again, Zain.
Let us begin with some breaking developments regarding Iran, where tensions have sharply escalated. As of June 12th, the US and Iran are preparing for a sixth round of indirect talks in Oman, following previous 5 rounds in April. These talks, however, appear to be in a deadlock. The US maintains that Iran must not be allowed to enrich uranium, while Tehran insists on its sovereign right to enrichment, citing protections under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Just today, according to Reuters, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, with its Board of Governors, declared Iran in violation of its nuclear obligations for obstructing inspectors and failing to explain uranium traces at undeclared sites. In response, Iran announced plans to construct a third underground enrichment facility and deploy more advanced centrifuges, accelerating its nuclear program. Parallel to these developments, according to CBS News and the Times of UK and other sources, Israel is reportedly finalizing military plans to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, with or without US support. As a precaution, the US has evacuated non-essential embassy staff from Iraq, Bahrain, and Kuwait. In response, Iran's defense ministry has publicly warned that any attack would result in direct retaliation against US bases across the Middle East. Against this backdrop of stalled diplomacy, formal international seizure by the IAEA, and escalating military threats, the region appears to be entering a period of dangerous uncertainty. Given these developments, are we now truly approaching a military confrontation with Iran? How do you see the situation developing, and what would this mean for the world if a war with Iran would take place?
Yes, we are on the verge of war with Iran, and this is entirely predictable. And it's what some of us, including yours truly, have been saying for years, that we are headed towards a war with Iran. And let's just comment on these so-called negotiations, shall we? The Iranians are quite right that they do have the right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich uranium for peaceful energy-related purposes or medically related purposes. You know, enriched uranium has an important role to play there. The current problem with the level of enrichment in Iran was precipitated by the Trump administration's the first Trump administration's withdrawal from the Obama-era nuclear deal, which the IAEA certified at the time Iran was respecting, and it limited enrichment to 3.67%, even though typically you need to enrich to the level of around 5% for a peaceful civil nuclear reactor. So Iran accepted and was complying with very stringent requirements. And it has the right to enrich for peaceful purposes, and the Trump administration is trying to deprive it of that right, when it is itself, armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons, and represents the state, the only state in human history that has actually used these monstrous weapons and used them on civilian populations in Japan. And in addition, the Trump administration, as have every single U.S. administration since the 1960s, they are protecting Israel, which has enough nuclear weapons to cause a nuclear winter, potentially killing billions of human beings, and is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and is the only state in the Middle East that isn't. So if you're in Iran's position, you're going to scoff at the idea that you have to give up peaceful nuclear energy enrichment, uranium enrichment. And in fact, I was in Iran recently, a few weeks ago, Zain, as many in your audience may know. And I spoke, along with other international journalists, to the head of the spokesperson of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. And they were adamant that they were not going to give up enrichment. And if they didn't want a war, But if they were going to have to wage a war in order to preserve that right, they were prepared to do it. So the United States, I don't think there's any, and no rational person in the United States, I don't know if there are any in the U.S. government, I don't know if there are any rational actors in the U.S. government, would think that Iran is going to capitulate at this stage to Trump's latest demand that they give up enrichment altogether. And I think, and the last thing I'll say about this, Zain, I believe that this is all kabuki theater. The Trump administration knows perfectly well that a majority of Americans want nothing to do with war with Iran. In fact, a poll just came out which showed that, a large majority. And it's positioning itself for justifying an illegal war of aggression on Iran. It wants to be able to say, hey, we tried to, secure a peace deal with the Iranians. We made every possible effort to make the deal happen. We didn't want war, but those Iranians were just completely and utterly unreasonable. And we even told the Israelis, we don't think this is the right time to attack, but Israel's in a tough neighborhood. And what are we going to do now that the Israelis have attacked Iran? We have no alternative but to support them. This is the narrative that they're constructing. These negotiations are not intended to result in a deal. And in fact, this has nothing to do at the end of the day with Iran's nuclear weapons program, because as Tulsi Gabbard herself, the director of national intelligence, acknowledged in the 2025 threat assessment of the U.S. government, Iran isn't trying to build a nuclear bomb. So what's this about? This is about destroying. It's about creating a failed state where Iran currently exists, as they've done in Libya, as they did in Afghanistan, as they did in Syria, as they're now doing to Lebanon. If you cannot put a regime in power in a part of the world you want to control, this is how the Western governments think, then you just destroy the country. And they've done it again and again and again. So what they're really trying to do here is not, destroy some fictional nuclear weapons program in Iran. They're trying to destroy Iran itself.
So, don't you think they're thinking about the consequences when Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Syria was destroyed? There was a huge refugee crisis that came towards Europe. We saw the rise of far-right parties. We saw the rise of extremism around the region, Sunni extremism in particular. And don't you think attacking Iran could unleash not only a refugee crisis, but also a third world war, giving strategic partnerships that it has with China and Russia? And also the fact that China brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran to ensure that they stop with their proxy wars and everything and open diplomatic relationships. Don't you think this would put the Middle East completely up in flames, which would be counterproductive to the Europeans as well as the Americans in terms of oil prices and economic situation? So what is the rationale if Israel goes and does this? What would happen to the world as we know it now?
All bets are off as to what would happen. I agree with everything you said. The war on Iran is likely to have all of those consequences. A renewed and unprecedented refugee crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean. A serious blows to the global economy because of a soaring price for oil and gas. Untold numbers of persons killed. Even Israel itself will be at risk of being devastated. For those who only care about the future of the Zionist entity, you should be very concerned about where this is all heading. One could go on and on. There are going to be a lot of Americans who die because there are many serving in bases that are completely exposed to the hypersonic missiles of the Islamic Republic. So this is a terrible idea. But, Zain, I think the United States government has proven over and over again, as has that of Israel, that they don't particularly care about how their actions affect the innocent or other parts of the world, including in particularly Europe. The Biden administration and the Trump administration have been pursuing policies in the Ukraine war, as I've tried to explain on many occasions, which are profoundly contrary to the interests of ordinary Europeans. And now they're telling the Europeans to spend 5% of GDP, an absolutely shocking number, 5% of GDP every year on military, when there's no credible evidence that anybody intends to invade, the NATO members of Europe. I mean, if Russia had plenty of reason during the last 3 years, given how NATO has supported Ukraine, to attack a NATO state, and it didn't. And I think the Russians are intelligent enough to understand that if they were to do that, they would probably precipitate a nuclear war if they attacked a NATO country. That's precisely why they haven't done it, despite all of the support for Ukraine. So this is all a sham. This 5% of GDP being necessary to protect European states, it's going to cause European governments to have to reallocate money from socially beneficial uses to the military-industrial toilet, as I like to call it. So they don't care about Europe. They don't care about ordinary citizens. They don't care, certainly don't care about the peoples of West Asia. All they care about is dominating the region and its strategic trade routes and its vast oil and gas resources. That's all they care about. And anybody who gets in the way, they will destroy in the most brutal, genocidal manner imaginable. That's the world in which we currently live. The good news is we can stop it if we collectively act and are extremely determined in our collective action to stop our governments from going down this path. But so far, we have not shown the level of resistance necessary to stop it.
Let us switch to Ukraine. On June 1st, Ukraine launched Operation Spiderweb, a covert operation in which it deployed 117 drones smuggled into Russia. The coordinated strike hit 5 air bases across Russia. Western media assert that around 40 Russian military aircraft were damaged or destroyed, amounting to approximately 10% of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, causing up to $7 billion in losses and damages. Some reports also indicate that Ukraine orchestrated strikes on rail infrastructure and bridge inside Russia, though details remain limited. In days following, Russia responded with intense missile and drone barrage against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, striking across major populations such as Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, and others. Diplomatically, Kiev and Moscow had the second round of talks in Istanbul on June 2nd, a day after Operation Spiderweb. And the talks barely lasted an hour, produced no ceasefire or long-term peace plan, but did, however, address the prisoner of war POW exchanges. As of June 9, around 500 POWs who were seriously wounded, ill, and were as young as age 18 to 25 have been released. Ukraine has proposed a third round of talks in Istanbul between June 20th and June 30th, though Russia has not confirmed their participation as of yet. Could you discuss the significance of Operation Spiderweb and the impact it will have in future peace talks?
Yeah, so we have 3 kabuki theaters going on right now simultaneously in West international relations. The first was the one I mentioned, the so-called peace negotiations with Iran, which are designed to fail. The second are these purported pressure that the Trump administration is applying on Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza. And the third one is the so-called peace talks in Ukraine. This is total kabuki theater. At the same time that Trump is saying ad nauseum that he wants to stop the war, what is he doing? He is sending weapons to Ukraine. He's providing military intelligence to Ukraine. He has boots on the ground, including many people from the CIA, other Western intelligence organizations in Ukraine, assisting the Ukrainians. He continuously demands a ceasefire, even though Russia has said repeatedly that it will not enter into a ceasefire without its core demands being met. He knows that the Russians aren't going to do that, continues to insist upon it. And the Russians are looking at this saying, well, they're just going to use this as an opportunity to rearm the Ukrainian military and to train more young Ukrainians to fight and die. Every indication is that the Trump administration is not serious. And I think what put the nail in the coffin of the claim that Trump was trying to end the war was Operation Spiderweb. The idea that the U.S. government was not aware of this beforehand is laughable. They were certainly aware. I can't imagine that Trump didn't know, even though he's denying it. And one thing is for sure, the Trump administration has done nothing to rein in Ukraine since. Did they condemn it? Did they say that we unequivocally condemn this as an irresponsible escalation attacking one of the arms of the Russian nuclear triad? No, they didn't do that. So what's really going on is that Trump again is posing as the leader of peace, the peacemaker, while behind the scenes through his actions demonstrating that he is hell-bent on fomenting and perpetuating war. And the situation, I think, now has become extraordinarily dangerous for us in Europe, precisely because the Russians, I think, have lost all confidence in the Trump administration to try to end this war. And they see that they're prepared to go to just about any lengths to bring Russia to heel. Whatever you may think at the end of the day about the justification or the alleged justification Russia has given for doing this, you should be deeply concerned that this escalation is not stopping, and that we are heading towards potentially a direct conflict between NATO and the Russian Federation because of operations like Operation Spiderweb.
Don't you think the argument that the Operation Spiderweb was needed to balance the scales a little bit because Russia was advancing and not taking the peace talks seriously. There was repeated attempt by Trump to get Putin to stop attacking population centers such as Kiev, and Putin did not step back on it, but were more concerned about advancing and taking as much as territory as possible. What do you make of this argument?
Well, any military aircraft are legitimate targets. So I don't take the position, and by the way, I don't think Russia is either, the attacks on those airfields constituted terrorism. But just because something is a legitimate military target doesn't mean it's smart for you to strike it. What has been the Russian reaction to this? Has it been to sit back down at the negotiating table and make all the concessions that have been demanded of Russia? No. Russia has, in fact, responded in the same way it has responded every time something like this was done. It has escalated its aerial attacks on Ukrainian military targets. So this is, in fact, not helping the Ukrainian people. It is prolonging a war that is destroying their country. If this was actually effective to achieve the goals of stopping the fighting, then people would have an argument, but it's not effective, and it's not proved effective at any point during this 3.5-year war. So ultimately, the people who are going to suffer as a result of this provocation will be the Ukrainian people themselves.
Let us now examine Israel's assault in Gaza. Since May 19, Western leaders, including Canada, the UK, France, and New Zealand, issued a joint declaration warning of concrete actions if Israel did not halt its Gaza military operations and ease humanitarian restrictions. On June 10th, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway followed through by imposing targeted sanctions, asset freezes, and travel bans on two key far-right Israeli ministers, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. More recently, Israel Foreign Minister Gideon Starr traveled to Berlin and met with German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul. During the visit, Wadephul sharply criticized Israel's conduct, stating that its settlement expansion in the West Bank amounted to violations of international law. He also referenced the 2024 ruling by the ICJ, International Court of Justice, which instructed Israel to allow humanitarian aid to enter into Gaza. Despite Wadephul's criticism, he reaffirmed Germany's continued military support for Israel, citing Germany's historic responsibility as a basis for ongoing arms exports. Meanwhile, the US has strongly defended Israel against these sanctions. Secretary of State Marco Rubio criticized the measures as counterproductive and reiterated America's commitment to military aid for Israel. How do you assess the West's attitude towards Israel? Are we seeing a rupture where one states are heading a different direction, whereas the others are still remain committed to supporting Israel at all costs? How do you interpret these developments, which are contradictory in nature?
So the way we got here, I think you indicated on May 19th, these five governments issued a warning to Israel. And what they said is, if you do not halt settlement expansion, we will employ targeted sanctions. So within, I think, 8 days, Israel announced the creation of 22 new settlements. And this was described by Israeli peace groups as being the largest single expansion of the illegal settlement program in the history of the settlements, which started, I think, in 1968. Canada and these other 4 states were now boxed into a corner. Israel basically made it impossible for them to say that they were complying with their demand and and carrying out their threat. So what did the Western governments do? In my view, Zain, they did the absolute bare minimum. They chose the 2 most extreme members of a cabinet, a Netanyahu cabinet that is entirely far right. It's not just these 2. Everybody in that cabinet supports Israel's genocidal rampage on the Palestinian people and settlement expansion. None of them is pushing back. There's no indication of that. They're all deeply complicit in these war crimes. And Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have been indicted by the ICC, and yet they were not included in these sanctions. Predictably, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the 2 who were targeted with these sanctions, these travel bans and asset freezes, scoffed at them, mocked them. And in fact, the extraordinary Israeli journalist Gideon Levy has just written an article in which he described the sanctions as tiny and sad. He basically is mocking them. So this was the absolute bare minimum. I just want to point out to the declassified UK reported just now that the Starmer government, which is one of the 5 governments that imposed these sanctions, has admitted that it is training Israeli military personnel. And it continues to provide massive amounts of weapons as Israel carries out a genocide before the eyes of the world. Germany itself is, I believe, the second largest supplier of weapons after the United States to Israel. Britain also being a major supplier, particularly through the Akrotiri military base on southern Cyprus. So they're just paying lip service. As I said, there's a kabuki theater going on in that part of the world. The kabuki theater is the West is trying to rein Israel in when in their actual policies are not only allowing but enabling this genocide. Nobody should be fooled by these sanctions. They will not stop the genocide. I don't even think they're going to slow it down, and I think Western governments know that.
As of June 12, Gaza faces a profound humanitarian catastrophe. Over 55,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 2023. Famine risk is widespread. Malnutrition, especially among children, is escalating, and there's severe shortage of food, water, and medical supplies, alongside mass displacement. To shed light on this catastrophe, a British flag vessel named Mandolin, organized by Freedom Flotilla Coalition, set sail on June 1st from Italy, carrying a symbolic humanitarian cargo, rice, baby formula, and medical supplies, and was also accompanied by climate activist Greta Thunberg. This was intercepted in international waters on June 9 by Israel, and all of these that were on board were deported. In the midst of all this, Israel and the United States have also launched what they call Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, an alternative aid distribution system that has effectively replaced UNRWA and other established agencies, including the Red Cross. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has repeatedly accused of Hamas of attacking its convoys and personnel, including the killing of 5 to 8 aid workers near Khan Yunis on June 11th. What is your assessment of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? Do you believe this organization is compromised or politically instrumentalized? And why do you think Israel and the US are so intent on sidelining long-established humanitarian actors like the United Nations and the Red Cross?
Well, the Gaza Aid Foundation, or whatever they call it, was set up in Switzerland very recently by somebody who is connected with the state of Israel. It is staffed by what appear to be, at least many of its staff members appear to be American mercenaries. And they have acted as such during the course of these operations, these so-called humanitarian operations in Gaza. There are highly credible reports of numerous massacres of starving Palestinians who had gathered at the distribution points of this so-called humanitarian organization, including, reports from Western-based medical professionals who are on the ground in Gaza. There is also an admission by the Netanyahu regime that it was arming a group within Gaza that was stealing aid and that has been effectively waging a war against the Palestinian militants there. And so these claims that Hamas is stealing the aid are not borne out by credible independent evidence. And what the supporters of the Palestinian people are alleging is perfectly consistent with Israel's prior behavior. It has massacred many humanitarian workers. I believe now we're in the hundreds in terms of the UNRWA workers who have been killed by Israeli attacks since October 7, 2023 in Gaza. We saw that they just basically executed the workers from World Central Kitchen, hunted them down like beasts and executed them in Gaza, and there was no accountability for that, even though the victims were predominantly from the West. So no one should attach any weight whatsoever to Israel's accounts of what is going on. It appears that it is using humanitarian aid as bait. That's how inhumane this regime is. It's using it as bait to gather starving Palestinian civilians together in a place where they can be more easily gunned down in large numbers.
To my last question, there was a lot of hope, as you know, when Trump was coming into power, that perhaps peace will prevail. There was a strain within the Republican Party, which started from personalities such as Ron Paul, that took a stronghold during the elections. And there was some hope that this strain of power was free from neoconservatism and would eventually cause Trump to initiate some sort of peace, at least in Ukraine. However, we are now seeing, whether it's in Gaza, Palestine, whether it's Iran and Ukraine, in what you've dubbed Kabuki theater, all of this falling apart. How do you see this developing this year, and what should people be doing now, especially given the difficulties that people are facing with inflation and economic situation? How do they engage and give rise to an anti-war movement that can address all of these issues and prevent the world from sinking into World War III?
Well, even though I just was quite critical and stand by all my criticisms of these sanctions, Zain, the good news, there's at least two pieces of good news. The first is that this is a red line that these five states have crossed. I'm not aware that there has ever been a sanction imposed by any Western government, even a weak one like these ones, on any sitting minister or even a former minister of the Israeli government, or a Western government for that matter, despite the crimes that Western governments have committed over the years. There's been this kind of collective fanatical determination to avoid any form of accountability on the civilian and military leaders of Israel, and that has been breached. And so this could become the proverbial crack in the dam that causes the dam to collapse. But whether that happens is now going to depend upon us. We need to apply more pressure instead of becoming demotivated, thinking, "Oh well, they've sanctioned these two people, and now, they're fulfilling their responsibilities." No, they're not. We should see this as proof that pressure works, but that the pressure to date has not been sufficient. And the other piece of good news is the polling data that is coming out of the West is remarkable for what it shows about public attitudes towards Israel. One poll, I think it was done by Pew, examined the responses in 24 different countries, 14 of which were from the West, mostly Europe, towards Israel. And every single of those 14 Western countries, majority said they had an unfavorable view of Israel. And a very small proportion said that they had something in the range, 10 to 20% in general, a positive view of Israel. There was a poll done, and by the way, the levels of unfavorable views towards Israel in Germany was in excess of 60%. I believe it was 61%. Even the United States, a majority had a negative view, 53%. Another poll just came out which showed that a substantial majority of Brits support a total arms embargo on Israel and also support the expulsion of Israel from the United Nations. And only a very small proportion, less than 20%, were opposed to those things. And the last poll I'll mention, because I'm here in Canada today in Montreal, is a poll just came out by Leger, which is considered to be the most accurate polling firm in Canada, showing that 49% of Canadians believe that Israel is committing genocide, whereas only 21% disagree with that assertion. So the number who say Israel is committing genocide is more than 2 times greater than those who disagree. And if you look at the poll closely, you'll see that 54% of the people there said they don't follow events in the Middle East very closely, like closely at all. So I think that's why you've seen that still about half the population is not agreeing with the premise that Israel is committing genocide. But 49%, this is absolutely unprecedented. You know, the tide of public opinion is shifting dramatically against Israel. It is rapidly becoming the most despised country in the world. And when we see levels of protest that are commensurate with this growing recognition that we are enabling monstrosities by Israel and have been for decades, that crack, as I say, that proverbial crack in the dam, might just result suddenly and dramatically in the dam's collapse. And I believe that that's where we're heading.
Dimitri Lascaris, independent journalist and human rights lawyer, thank you so much for your time today again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Zain.
And thank you for tuning in today. If you watched this video until the very end and you're watching our videos regularly, make sure to support our journalism with a donation today. We don't take any money from corporations or governments and don't even allow advertisement, all with the goal of providing you with information that is free of any external influence. Hence, we depend you, our viewers, to continue our independent and critical journalism that you just won't hear in the mainstream media. I thank you for your support and for tuning in. I'm your host, Zain Raza. See you next time.